Hi, I want to welcome you and thank you for streaming this message today. I'm really glad that you joined us. At Bailey Christian Church, it matters to us that you feel welcomed, like that this is family. Whether you're young or not so young, my hope is that you'll encounter Jesus, and that as you encounter Jesus, you'll find encouragement to live a life of faith for Him. If you're new with us today, I would love if you wouldn't mind filling out the Connect card that is linked here, or going to baileychristianchurch.com and letting us know who you are, if you have any questions that we can follow up with, or even if you have a prayer concern and you'd like somebody to pray for you, we'd love to know so that we can connect with you. If you're in the area sometime, in the Bailey area, we'd love to have you join us in person. And the reason I invite you into that is because we're called not just to experience a message, but actually to live a life of faith in the context of community. And so we'd love for you to be a part of what's happening here at Bailey. And if you want to know more about how you can get plugged in to what's happening here, again, go back to baileychristianchurch.com, check things out, and if we can help you, we would love to follow up with you as well. I hope today that you're blessed through this message. You may be familiar with the phrase, "The reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated." Actually, that's a quote from Mark Twain back in 1897. He was in London, and the papers had declared that he had died. And so his quote was a little bit different, but it was essentially the same thing, which was that the report of my death had been exaggerated. And now it's kind of that sentence and a meme has kind of lived on well beyond that to define when somebody is been talked about as they are on their way out, or some organization is near the end, to come and say, that may have been a little overdone. Time and time again, that could be said of the church. That people had declared that the church throughout the centuries at times, it was on death's door. It was about to breathe its last. G.K. Chesterton, who was a Christian thinker and writer back in the early 1900s, wrote, and he reflected on this. He says, "It is so true that 3 or 4 times at least in the history of Christendom, the whole soul seemed to have gone out of Christianity, and almost every man in his heart expected its end. Christendom, or Christianity, has had a series of revolutions, and in each one of them, Christianity has died. Christianity has died many times and risen again, for it had a God who knew the way out of the grave." And he wasn't saying that Christianity actually died once and for all, but that it ebbed and flowed, and it looked like it was on its last leg. And so with that thought in mind, I want us to go back through the book of Acts. We've been studying Acts for the whole summer, and obviously a little bit into the fall here, and this is our wrap-up message on this. The journey continues. After Jesus died, he was buried, he raised from the dead, he gave a commission to his disciples, and then he ascended to heaven, and now we see the life of the early church in the book of Acts. But if you've been with us, or if you've read through the book of Acts, you'll know that it wasn't a straight climb up. They faced challenges. And so I want you to reflect a little bit on some of what the early church faced, even in the book of Acts in that first century. Persecution under Saul, and we know him as Paul as well, where he was trying to arrest Christians, put them in prison, put them to death. The Jewish Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish leadership, tried to stamp out the Christian voice and the apostles, and to basically authorize them or deauthorize them from using the name of Jesus, only to find that as Saul is going to arrest Christians on the way to Damascus, Jesus interrupts his journey and he comes to Christ, he becomes a Christian, and the church grows. And over again throughout the book of Acts, you see challenges came up, and it looked like maybe the church was going to face a dark time, only to find that it grew healthier. Then you flash forward about 30 years under Emperor the Caesar Nero. In 64 AD, the city of Rome burns. And the populace believes that Nero set it on fire himself for his own purposes. Now, whether or not that was true, he had to look for a scapegoat. And so what Nero did was he blamed the Christians. Here's what the Roman historian Tacitus wrote. By the way, sometimes people say, does anybody outside of the Bible mention Jesus or Christianity? Well, Tacitus is one of those in that first century that mentions Christianity. Here's what he says in response to Nero's situation. It says, consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, so Christ, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilatus. So you already have a confirmation of what we see in the Bible. This is outside of Scripture saying this happened. And a most pernicious superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. Accordingly, and here's where we get to the point about the Christians, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty. That is, they pleaded that, yes, they believe in Jesus, they are Christians. Then upon their information, an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city, but as of hatred against mankind. And then he goes on to write, mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. Covered with the skins of beasts, they were thrown into the gladiators, and they were thrown to be torn by dogs and perished, and they were nailed to crosses or were doomed to the flames and burnt. And they were even sent to serve as a nightly illumination when daylight had expired. Nero took Christians, put them on poles, and lit up his garden with their flames. You might think, and many believe that it was during this period of time that the apostles Peter and Paul were also put to death in this time. And you would think that if anything would squash Christianity, it might be that kind of a level of persecution, but only to find that over the next century, the next couple of centuries, the church continued to grow. In fact, the harder that people tried to press them down, it seemed like the martyrs, as some have said, became the seeds of growth for the rest of the church. So we flash forward about 300 years to another emperor by the name of Julian. And it may be that Julian, who I believe may have had a Christian background, but he turned against that, and he wanted to squash the church as well, but he chose a different method. In the 300s AD, Julian began by making it difficult for Christians to work in professions like education and in law and military. Sounds familiar even today in some places. His methods were mostly bloodless, but he knew that martyrs made Christianity strong. It was better, he thought, to marginalize believers, neutralizing their influence and pushing them out of public life. But Julian's attempts didn't work either. There were other attempts in the subsequent centuries, but I want to flash forward to the 1700s. You have the Enlightenment. You have writers like Voltaire and people that are focused on the mind, and they think that we can do life without God. We don't really need God to explain things. And so you have people saying, God is no longer needed. The French Revolution, about the same period of time, you have the French taking over church lands and controlling clergy and making them make commitments to the government. And so they were trying to control and push down the church. And then in the 1800s, you have the Darwinist revolution, with evolution becoming a kind of a way of describing all of reality, that we didn't need God. You could be an atheist and be fulfilled because you didn't need God to explain how we all got here. And so the idea was that science could explain everything, and that the idea of a creator was no longer necessary to explain the reality of the world. You flash forward decades into the 1900s, and you have communists and socialists, not only in the Soviet Union, but I think of the Maoist revolution in China. Under communism, the idea was the state would be your God, the state would be your father. In fact, the goal of Chinese communism was to squash the church, to arrest the pastors, put some of them to death, and to take over their church buildings. They thought that would kill the church as well. And then in the 1960s, there was a famous Time magazine cover that read, "Is God Dead?" And the discussion was about, in theology settings, in theological seminaries, there were so-called theological professors who were trying to explain things with theology without God, which is odd because the word theology means the study of God. And so they're trying to explain even God and reality without God. And so with all of this going on, there are different points and pockets of history in which people were going, how's the church going to survive this? And then flash forward to the 2020s, or to 2020 when COVID hit, and how many churches' doors were shut. And not only were they shut because of COVID, but some of them never opened up again because they just could not endure financially or otherwise. And there were a lot of Christians and a lot of people, even in the media, wringing their hands and going, the church is kind of on its way out. But it's amazing to me that time after time, about the moment that somebody says that the church is dead, you hear word of a rising up of a revival. You hear word of something happening in some other place around the country, around the globe, and you realize that God is not done. The other challenge that we have, and this is true in every generation, you always wonder if the next generation has the guts and the wherewithal to take the baton and run with it, don't you? I mean, somebody's described it this way. You remember when you're in high school and you're a freshman and you start in high school. For those of you that aren't there yet, this will happen to you too. And the seniors look huge. I mean, everybody, they just look big, and they seem so old, and some of them are growing beards, and and then you become a sophomore and a junior, and you go, are they making freshmen smaller? I mean, was I ever that small? I mean, gosh, these guys are weasels, and how are they ever going to become as big and strong as us? Even if you're 50, 60, and 70, you look back, oh, this generation, what are they going to do? I mean, the world's going to fall apart in their hands. Oh, you've said that, huh? Some of you have thought that. Well, let me take you to Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 10. You may wonder where does this all come back to Acts, and we'll get to that. But Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 10, I think this is a helpful caution to us. It says, "Do not say, why were the old days better than these? For it is not wise to ask such questions." We can romanticize our past and our history and all the things that we went through, not that there isn't truth to some of those things, but we can then glorify and think that anybody else that comes after us, this thing's going to fall apart in their hands. And we miss one really important piece of that. That is God. The God in the midst of all of these changes in history and the times in which it looked like the church itself was not going to be able to take another step forward, we find out that God raises up a new leader and a new group of leaders. You see, it's natural to wonder when there are tough times in life and for the church, what is going to happen? Is the church hanging by a thread? Is everything broken? Before we get back to the bulk of our message, I want to just share three truths with you. And this is true for the church, and it's true for your own life. Truths that have to do with life and trials and difficulties that we all face. Truth number one. Keep this in mind. We are limited. There is much we can't see and don't know. One of the problems when we find ourselves making declarations is what we're doing is we're taking the position of God. as if to say that somehow we know all things. And just keep in mind, we're not God. There is a Messiah, and his name's not Darren. His name is Jesus. I didn't die, you didn't die for us, Jesus did. And so we realize that there are things that we don't see. Number two, we are often too close to know where things will lead. It's possible to say, man, this is going nowhere good. And from where we stand, it sure looks that way. How could anything good come out of 2020? And there are lots of things that were not good that came out of 2020. But I believe that God was doing some other things in the midst of that as well. While awful things are happening, good things are also happening and vice versa. Rick Warren used to say that life always goes on two tracks. One is good times, and the other is bad times. And the reality is that both are happening at the same time. Now, what we often think is, boy, I can't wait till I'm only on this one track. I want to be a monorail. I want to be on the good times. But the reality is, even when good things are happening, there are challenging things. And when challenging things happen, there are also good things happening, which leads to truth number three, and that is that God is sovereign. The word sovereign means that he's on his throne. He's king. He's in control. He's the ruler. So God is always, we need to keep this in mind, God is always at work fulfilling his plans, even when things seem least likely to succeed. It's a helpful reminder for us personally, but it's also a helpful reminder when we think of the church. And when we look at the life of Paul, who takes up a good second half of the book of Acts, we see Paul and the church go through this as well. So let's take a look at the life of Paul, and we'll lead up to the end of the book of Acts together, looking at Paul and the church together. In Acts chapter 9, Paul is heading to Damascus. Jesus interrupts his journey. He's blinded, and he goes into Damascus for 3 days. He's got some time he's in a grown-up timeout. You coming against me, Jesus says, and he said, no. You need to go sit in a corner and think about what you've been up to. Jesus then sends Ananias to go heal Paul. But here's what Jesus says to Ananias in Acts 9:15. But the Lord said to Ananias, go. This man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. He says, I have chosen him not only to preach to the Jews and to preach to the Gentiles, the non-Jewish world, but he's going to stand before kings and rulers. And then he says this, and Jesus says, and I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. See, Jesus promises that Paul will be his messenger to Jew and Gentile and kings and rulers, but he also promises it will be with pain. And so it is. Several years later, in 55, 56 AD, Paul writes, now as a Christian, now as an apostle, that is one who was sent out by Jesus with authority. He writes to the church at Corinth. In 2 Corinthians, I want you to take a look at this. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 21. One of the challenges that are happening in Corinth is you have these other false apostles who are downplaying Paul and trying to grab attention and money and all that for themselves. And so Paul's pretty passionate about this. But listen to how he describes his life and his journey. Verse 21. He says, whatever anyone else dares to boast about, he says, I'm speaking as a fool. I also dare to boast about. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are the Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? Well, so am I. Are they servants of Christ? I'm out of my mind to talk like this. I am more. And then here's what he uses as a mark of his apostleship. He says, I've worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I've labored and toiled and have gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have gone often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. And then skip forward to verse 32. In Damascus, the governor under King Aretas had the city of the Damascenes guarded in order to arrest me, but I was lowered in a basket from a window in the wall and slipped through his hands. That's what Paul signed up for. I don't know that he fully had any clue that that's all that would be involved in it, but that's what his ministry would look like, this amazing calling by Jesus. By the way, I've said this before, I'll say it again. Sometimes we go, man, I want Paul's vision encounter. If Jesus was just encounter me like that on the road to Damascus and bright light, all that kind of stuff, that would be amazing. Just remember that when Jesus intervenes like that, there's something that comes with it. I'm not sure that you want to ask for that. I mean, if that's what God calls you to, awesome. But the reality is this. Paul, even though he went through this, would make clear that he's not done. That nothing's going to hold him back from proclaiming the good news of Jesus, not only to them, but to the whole world. In fact, in the next year, about 57 AD, scholars think, he still had visions of going further. So he writes to the Roman church. He hasn't been to Rome himself, but he says this in Romans 15:23. But now there is no more place for me to work in these regions. I've been everywhere, preaching the gospel. And since I have been longing for many years to visit you, I plan to do so when I go to Spain. He has visions of going to Spain as well. I hope to see you while passing through and have you assist me on my journey there after I've enjoyed your company for a while. Now, however, I'm on my way to Jerusalem in the service of the Lord's people there. For Macedonia and Achaia, we're pleased to make a contribution for the poor among the Lord's people in Jerusalem. And that's where we're at in the book of Acts, as Paul has made his way now, making his way to and toward Jerusalem. But in the midst of it, Paul had set his sights on Spain and then Rome as well. And he believed firmly that he would get there. In fact, as we're going to see, he will make it to Rome. But it won't probably happen quite the way he had planned. In fact, nothing, it seems like, in Paul's life happens quite the way maybe he had assumed it would. In Acts 21, he gets to Jerusalem, and in Acts 21, he's arrested by the Jewish leadership. He's arrested by the temple guards because the Jews believe, and they turn on him, they believe that he has brought a Gentile into the temple, that he's defiled the temple, which he hadn't. But in the midst of his arrest, in Acts 23, verse 11, Jesus comes to him. He says, the following night the Lord stood near Paul and said, take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome. That must have been an encouragement for Paul. He's arrested going, what's going to happen? And the Lord stands near him and says, hey, listen, you're going to go to Rome. Jesus is in this, even through the pain, and he's working his plan. And so as a result, all of the things that Jesus had promised that were going to come through Paul start to happen. He gives testimony before the Jewish Sanhedrin, before the ruling authorities of the Jews. Then he goes on trial before Governor Felix and then Governor Festus. And he even has a hearing with King Agrippa and his wife. And eventually we'll see he'll end up going to Rome to stand before Caesar, the emperor. But to get there, he's going to endure threats to be assassinated by the Jews. He'll be moved to Caesarea to stand trial there before the governors, and he's in prison in Caesarea for 2 years. He appeals to Caesar while he's there, and so because he's a Roman citizen, he gets to have a hearing before the Roman emperor, and he's put on a ship and he's sent to Rome. In chapter 27, we have it's a very detailed look. Luke is the author here, and you could tell he gives a bird's eye view on the ship and saying, here's what this journey looked like. And it's a long, kind of protracted description of the journey and the trials. And so here's what happens. The sea gets rough. A storm kicks up, and they are at sea for many days. In fact, Paul, before that, had warned them. He said, hey, listen, Captain, things are going to get bad. I think it'd be best not to disembark from this harbor. The captain says, well, who are you? You're just a prisoner. And the captain doesn't listen. So they end up enduring a severe storm and they're lost at sea. But even in the midst of this, the Lord makes clear to Paul, I'm not done. And so let's go to Acts chapter 27, verse 21. After they had gone a long time without food, so all of the sailors and the soldiers and the prisoners on the ship, Paul stood up before them and he said, men, you should have listened to me. You should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then we would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost, only the ship will be destroyed. Last night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve, stood beside me, and he said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. And God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island. So he's put on a ship. He's shipwrecked, or that's what's going to happen. So the potential of drowning. The soldiers, as they're about ready to jump off the ship, so to speak, the soldiers say we should just kill all of the prisoners, because the thing about soldiers and prisoners in the Roman world was if you lose a prisoner, you lose your own life. And so let's just get rid of them now. And the captain said no. And then they land on shore. And Paul's gathering sticks, and in chapter 28, and a poisonous viper, a snake, comes out and bites him. And of course, then the locals are like, well, man, must be that fate is against him, that he should have died in the shipwreck, but it didn't happen, so they're not done with him. But then they watched, and he didn't die. John Stott put it this way. Look at this quote. It's on your insert, and it's be on the screen as well, is that each incident seemed to be designed to prevent him from reaching his God-planned and God-promised destination. Seemed like everything was stacked against Paul fulfilling the mission of Christ, the mission of the church, to go to Rome. So it gives us an opportunity to reflect a little bit. Why? Why the shipwreck? Why the weeks at sea? Why does Luke take so much time on all this? Why does he take a whole chapter to explain all the details of this ship excursion? Well, Stott points out, I think it's a helpful insight. In the Old Testament, the sea was envisioned in the ancient world as the center of chaos, the place of evil powers. In this case, kind of aligned against, in opposition to God. Not nature per se, but Satan. And the reason I highlight this is not because Satan is in the sea, but using the ancient imagery, it's quite possible that Luke is trying to highlight something that is really going on, that there is a satanic plot, there is a force against the will of God to try to thwart his plans. So is it possible that what Luke is doing is revealing a spiritual battle behind the scenes that is being played out on the sea and through the ruling powers and even through a poisonous snake? Well, if so, it wouldn't be the first time that Satan has done this. I want you to think back through the Bible, and whether you know the Bible well or not, I'll highlight some things. Satan, even though his name doesn't show up, tries to undo the people of God. When Moses was born, the people of God were starting to multiply, and so Pharaoh wanted to just to put an end to it, and so he had the baby boys thrown into the Nile River. But Moses' mother guarded and protected him, and God spared him. And then we flash forward to the book of Esther. And Haman, an enemy against the people of God, against the Jewish people, wanted to wipe out the Jewish people. And then God raised up for such a time as this Esther to save and to spare, that at the moment when it looked like there was no hope and the Jewish people were going to be wiped out, God raised somebody up. And then flash forward to the time of Jesus' birth. And Herod gets word by the wise men that this king of the Jews has been born in Bethlehem. And so he has little boys 2 years and under put to death. But God spares Jesus. And then in the book of Acts, the Sanhedrin, the Jewish leadership, they rise up to try to quench and quiet and stamp out the voice of the apostles in the early church. And aside from that, you also have in the early chapters of Acts, you have the lying of Ananias and Sapphira, the potential of the church to become infected by sin. Or you have the potential of division between how the widows of the Hebrews and the widows of the Jewish or the Greeks, Greek-speaking Jews are being fed, and you have division. You have the potential leading up to chapter 15 of the debate between how Jewish do the Gentiles have to be. And it seemed really like if everything was leaning in one direction, it was that the potential of this movement being a splinter and falling apart was more likely than unity. And here we have a storm. And it seems like at each point, the evil one, through various iterations, is trying to put a stop to things, only to find that God wins in the end. Because you see, it seems unlikely that Paul is ever going to get where he has said he's supposed to go. But Jesus, all along the way, continues to reassure him that he will protect him, that he's got plans for him. But while Jesus promises Paul he will get there, he doesn't tell him how. I want you to reflect on this for a moment. I think that's true for us too. God in his wisdom may allow methods that seem painful to us along the way and take way too long. I said, God, I thought you were going to bless me. I thought you were going to do really good things. And he said, well, that's actually what I'm doing in the midst of this. But again, sometimes we're so close to it, we just don't get it. And that's why it's helpful to step back and take a bigger view of things. So take a look at your insert. Let me ask a question. We'll kind of unpack this together. Why is this happening to Paul? And we can say, why would any of these things happen to us? Number one, remember, Satan is constantly attempting to thwart God's mission. Now, I'm not saying that every bad thing that happens in your life, or you blame it on Satan, or when we mess up, we say, well, hey, I didn't, the devil made me do it, kind of stuff. I'm not trying to put everything, a spirit under every rock, and blame Satan for everything that happens. But here's what the Bible says, 1 Peter 5:8. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Resist him, stand firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. So we need to be aware that there's a spiritual battle that we often miss because we're just looking at flesh and blood. And so Paul understood that. But here's another reflection, and this is for you. Is it possible that the struggles that you have faced at times have in fact been the evil one's plans to trip you up? Not necessarily, not God trying to mess you up, but the evil one trying to trip you up so that you lose sight of God, so that you quit looking to him, so that you grow frustrated and distracted. It's helpful to keep that in mind because there are times where we go, God, why? When we miss the fact that there is a battle that goes on and that God has allowed these things to happen, and God is using those in the midst of our situation to grow us and to do his work, but it can be hard to see because we're so close to it. Here's a second thing to remember. Remember that God is working all things for good for his people and his plans. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Now keep in mind, there are some things that are key factors here. It's not just that God, everything happens for a purpose. That's a very common statement today. That's not what the Bible says. I'm not saying that God isn't involved even in things that don't include Christians, but the promise here is not just a blanket statement for everybody. It says, for all who love God and who are called according to his purpose. Now, if we're not following God, it's possible things are happening just because we're making really knuckleheaded decisions. And even if we are following God, it's possible we've made knuckleheaded decisions at times. But as we love and we lean into God, that God will use even those things for His purposes. So here's a reflection question. How has God used trials in your life for your good and fulfilling His mission? As you look back over your life, sometimes it's hard to see in the moment, but in hindsight, you look back and you said, man, if that had not happened, I would not be where I am today. Boy, God, I was about to give up. I'm glad you held me through that. It's because of that I endured, that something better came out the other side. I didn't know in the moment. And that's where God calls us for faith. He says, I want you to trust me. Even if you can't see me, trust that my hand is there. So let me go back to this and reflect a little bit with Paul. Why all of this trouble for Paul? I want you to let's just think a little bit of what happens in this time period. Paul is in prison for about 4 years, 2 years in Caesarea, 2 years in Rome. He's about 6 months at sea. So it'd be easy to say, why in the world God would, his life isn't, he's not going to be that old. He's only got so many years to minister. Why do you want 5 of those years to be in custody? Well, do you know what happened in those 4.5, 5 years? Paul went on to write Ephesians and Philippians and Colossians and Philemon. And if you've ever read through those books, and maybe you did this summer, you'll see that there's a passion. He has time almost to reflect. He's got some time to write. And he shows the greatness of Christ, the exaltedness of Christ. Philippians is filled with joy and with peace and with contentment, even while he's in the midst of chains. Is it possible that Paul's message was enriched because he was in chains? Is it possible that trials and struggles actually make your story even that much more believable because you're not just writing somewhere off at a distance from reality, you're writing in the midst of the persecution and you say that Jesus is here even still? Is it possible that trials inform our stories? I put it this way, every scar tells a story. All of us growing up probably have some scar, maybe not every one of us, but we're a kid and something happened and you go, let me show you. This one, man, my brother, oh man, what a day that was. Or this one, back in Nam, and or there's a story attached to it that actually builds into and informs your life. Scars tell a story. Yes, they were painful, but they at times bring lessons that we could never have had otherwise. And so as we wrap up our study of Acts, I want us to go back to the beginning of Acts, and even prior to that with Jesus' words in Matthew, to help us reflect on the overall mission Jesus has called the church to. In Acts chapter 1, verse 8, the opening verses really of the book of Acts, Jesus, before he ascends to the Father, says this, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." The opening verses of Acts start out with this grand vision, this ripple starting in Jerusalem and rippling out to the rest of the world. And guess what? As we get to the end of Acts, we see this promise being fulfilled. Paul is on his way to Rome. But we shouldn't be surprised, because Jesus had already promised in his ministry that the church would prevail. Look at Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. Jesus asked this question of his disciples. Who do people say that I am? As well, some think maybe it's Elijah or John the Baptist, come back from the dead, and various, the prophet. But then he says, but what about you? Who do you think I am? And Peter steps up on behalf of the disciple. He says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And so Jesus responds in verse 18, and I tell you that you are Peter, which is means rock. And on this rock, it's a different version of Peter, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. It's not so much that Jesus is building the foundation of the church on Peter, even though he is very pivotal to the early church. But the statement that Peter makes, which is that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, the church is going to be grounded and founded on that. But I want to focus on what he says at the end. He says, "And the gates of Hades will not prevail." Sometimes we've looked at that and we think, well, we've held strong and the church kind of hunkers down and we survive the storm like we're in the midst of a tornado or a hurricane. That's not the image. These are not the gates of the church, they're the gates of hell. What do gates do? Gates protect, gates keep people out. In other words, what he's saying is the picture here is not the Christians hunkering down, but that the Christians are taking territory. The Christians are making advance, that the powers of the evil one are not able to stand strong against the church, so the church will prevail. That was Jesus' promise to us. So when the church looks bleak, when the mission looks like it's going south, keep these visions in mind, keep these words in mind. Take a look at the last part of your insert as we wrap up the mission. Keep this in mind. Number one, the mission is God's. It's not yours per se. It doesn't start with you, it starts with God. Number two, the mission is Christ-centered. God's mission for us, the center of that mission is Christ and exalting Him. Number three, the mission is Holy Spirit empowered. It's not by my power. I have a will, I have a decision to make, but in the end, the power is by the Spirit of God working through me. And so because of this, victory is guaranteed. Victory, keep that in mind. As sad as it looks at times, as difficult and painful as it looks sometimes in the world around us and even among Christians, that victory is guaranteed. The gates of hell will not prevail. Which reminds us as we look at Paul's life is that the mission is worth it all. Because it's guaranteed, because it's God's, because it's Christ-centered, because it's Spirit-empowered, victory is guaranteed, it's worth it all. And here's the other part, and here's where we want to drive it home, is the mission is ours too. Not just Paul's, not just the early church, the mission is ours. And so because of this, the mission continues. The mission is not over yet. The mission continues. You see, Luke wraps up the book of Acts. If you've read through the book of Acts and you've seen how it ends, it ends kind of open-ended. Paul ends up in Rome, but we don't know from there what's going to happen. It doesn't say. It's as if Luke has left it open-ended, intending to say, how are you going to finish the mission? What part are you going to play? What is your chapter going to say? You see, there's only 28 chapters in the book of Acts, but you and I are writing Acts 29. The next chapter of the church's story. And believe it or not, your name and my name have been written into the story, just as Peter's and Paul's and Luke's. And no one is likely to read our parts of the story, but our lives play into it just as much as the great missionaries and the preachers and martyrs and saints. If you're a Christian, this is your story. This is your mission. What will your chapter say? This is our story. One of the reasons we gather every Sunday is to tell the story. It's powerful stories that enliven our hearts and our imagination, and we say, I want to be part of that story. Sign me up for that. It's one of the reasons why we take communion on a weekly basis, because we need to be reminded that we're part of something that didn't just start with us. In fact, in Acts chapter 20, where Paul is gathering in Troas with the believers, it says on the first day of the week, they gathered for the breaking of bread. It seems that by the first century already, they are already committing to regular gathering on the first day of the week, regular gathering for teaching, regular gathering for prayer, and for communion, for the breaking of bread, to remind themselves of who they are. And so in Matthew 26, verse 26, we take our step back into the time before Jesus died, the night that he was betrayed. And he says, while they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it, and he gave it to his disciples, saying, take and eat, this is my body. And then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. We come to the table on a weekly basis to remind ourselves of some of the basic, simple things. Jesus died. Jesus was buried. Jesus rose from the dead. And it's what Jesus did there that marks us. If that had not happened, we would not be gathering now. If it were not for Easter, there would be no Christmas. And so we gather living between Jesus' first coming and Jesus' second coming, and we point in both directions. And so this morning, as we come to this part of the mission for us, I want to invite you. If you're a Christian, you're welcome to partake with us. As the trays are passed, go ahead and take those cups and spend some time reflecting on Jesus himself. He is the author and the center of the mission that you and I get to be a part of. Let's pray. Jesus, what a privilege to be able to come to you and realize that we're part of a much bigger history and a story. And even the writer of Hebrews says that we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, and it may even be just the sense that the other saints even now are looking down as they're a part of this as well, even though they're in your presence, cheering us on. And so we come maybe in the midst of a struggle this week, maybe in the midst of wondering if we can hold on, and we are in this moment pausing to say that we believe because you are in this, that victory of the mission is guaranteed. May we be a part of that. Lord, use us to fulfill the mission you've given the church. And I pray in this moment that you'd be glorified. I pray that you'd be present in a very special and personal way. And may you be praised. In your name, Jesus. Amen.